The period in European history between the fall of the Roman Empire and the rebirth of learning during the European Renaissance is frequently referred to as the Dark Ages. Since these centuries were an in-between time, they are also called the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages were characterized by an eclipse of the classical learning of Greece and Rome, a lack of stable political organization, the spread and triumph of Christianity in Europe, and the gradual establishment of national border lines and urban centers of population. Actually, modern historical scholars are questioning the accuracy of the term Dark Ages to describe this period in European history. They say that while progress was slowed down, it nonetheless did occur, and that Europe at the close of the Middle Ages was in many ways more advanced than either Greece or Rome. Let us begin our examination of the Middle Ages with the fall of the Roman Empire. In 400 A.D., barbaric Germanic tribes captured Rome. This was the beginning of the Dark Ages. The Roman Empire had been tottering for some time. The Romans had conquered more territory than they could actually hold. The Romans had not fought a major war for centuries. Their soldiers were not as skilled and experienced as those of the early Roman Republic. Moreover, Roman soldiers and citizens had lost the sense of patriotism and solidarity which had made them so strong during the preceding centuries. The invading German tribes, on the other hand, although their arms were inferior to the Romans, were a fierce and warlike race. When the Visigoths under Alaric swept down on the city of Rome in the 4th century, the Romans hardly resisted. These barbarians wandered over the Roman Empire, burning and destroying everything. They were interested only in adventure and booty, and had no intention of establishing a new empire to replace the old one. When they had finished their pillaging, the Roman Empire was a shambles with absolutely no political unity left. It became fragmented into tiny isolated units with no communication or political relationships with other similar units. Political or governmental skill was not one of the national characteristics of the Germanic tribes, and the political disorganization of Europe which followed the collapse of the Roman Empire was to last for a long time. The early Germans were nomadic. They built no towns and had no homes. They depended mainly on hunting and foraging for their food. Therefore, they had to be able to move their camps on short notice. They built no cities and had no political organization beyond each individual tribe. War with neighboring tribes was frequent. Occasionally, several tribes would unite under one leader to form a large army, as in the case of the Visigoths, who united under Alaric to attack Rome. However, once Rome had been conquered, the tribes separated again and promised no allegiance to any single ruler. As they became more civilized, the Germans built homes and began to farm. They discovered that the regular production of crops was a surer method of obtaining a food supply than depending upon hunting or foraging. But quite naturally, farming meant year-round tending of fields. Thus it was no longer possible for the Germanic tribes to continue to migrate from place to place. They exchanged their tents for permanent homes, built close to the fields. Military life was reduced to an occasional defense of their lands against raiders. Gradually, the Germans became less and less warlike. Small settlements grew where skilled workers practiced their trades. Since war was no longer a daily necessity, the Germanic tribes began to develop the arts of peace. Many of these they learned from the conquered peoples among whom they had settled. The Goths and Visigoths settled in Italy, Spain, and France, as well as some of the territories further to the east. Although they did not reach the same heights as the Roman civilization, they nonetheless learned many skills from the former Roman citizens with whom they now lived and intermarried. Among the workers were blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, tailors, and goldsmiths. Here you see a German blacksmith forging a sword. The blacksmith's art was originally developed to produce weapons, but gradually the Germans began to concentrate more and more on peaceful metal articles, such as plows, household items, and carpenter's tools. During this period, another civilizing influence was making itself felt. The Christian church, whose major center had been the city of Rome, had not been destroyed. It began spreading north from Italy into German-controlled territories, preaching order, peace, and brotherhood. Monasteries were the only centers of education, learning, and religion. The idea of the monastery originated in Christianized North Africa, where groups of religious hermits began to live together in communities. The idea spread to Europe, where monastic orders were finally established as a regular church institution. Permanent monasteries, or abbeys, were built all over Europe. A series of vows and rules were set up for the monasteries. The 3 basic vows, which each entering monk took, were the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Monasteries became an important element in the international organization of the church. They, along with the convents for nuns, which were established later, and the cathedrals and churches, which were loyal to Rome, were the only international links connecting the isolated fragments of what had once been the Roman Empire. During the course of the Middle Ages, the monastic system branched into a number of different orders, including the Benedictine order, the Order of Cluny, and the Carthusian order. The monasteries kept alive the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. At this time, there were no public or private schools anywhere in Europe. People who desired an education turned to the church. The monastery schools were conducted in Latin, which was the language of the church. Only a tiny percentage of the population could read and write. The majority did not care to learn. But the church believed that education was valuable, if for no other reason than that it enabled a Christian to read and study religious texts and commentaries. The monasteries had the only libraries in Europe at that time. The monks wrote books on parchment, which was made from dried sheepskin. Since printing had not been invented, each book had to be copied tediously by hand. Monasteries expanded their libraries by borrowing books from other monasteries and copying them. The monks felt that copied books should be beautiful. They ornamented the pages of their books with delicate paintings and decorations called illuminations. Many of these masterpieces of medieval art have survived to our own day. Just as Rome fell to the Germanic tribes, Spain was conquered by the Arabs in 711. The Arabs of North Africa, or Moors, wished to spread the new Muslim religion and decided that the most effective means of doing so was by conquering non-Muslim countries. Led by the Arab leader Tariq, the Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar to Spain and established a Muslim empire in that country with their capital at Cordoba. While Europe lived in poverty and ignorance, the Arabs built universities and studied Greek and Roman books. Muslim Spain was the most civilized area in Europe. In the 10th century, the Christians in northern Spain began to retake the lands held by the Muslims. Gradually, the Muslims retreated, but it was not until 1492 that the last Muslim stronghold in Spain fell. This was the city of Granada, captured by the armies of Ferdinand and Isabella, joint rulers of Christian Spain. In Europe, few people knew that great civilizations had existed. Life was rough and crude. The vast majority had absolutely no education. If they lived in rural areas, their life was one long struggle to make the soil produce, using only primitive farming methods. If they lived in cities, they had to put up with crowded quarters, poor lighting, and unsanitary living conditions. Towns and people were dirty. Disease was widespread. Food and water were not kept free of germs. Garbage was dumped into the streets and never collected. There was no plumbing, and people never bathed. For these reasons, the mortality rate was extremely high, and life expectancy quite short. During the late Middle Ages, bubonic plague, known also as the Black Plague, swept over Europe, killing more than half the population. The practice of medicine was almost non-existent. Lawlessness forced men to group around a strong king or lord for protection. Bandits and raiders constantly attacked villages and farms all over Europe. It was necessary to have a castle or fortress nearby where people could seek protection when they were attacked. The common people were totally dependent upon a strong military leader for their defense. The need for protection and defense led to the establishment of the major form of political organization during the Middle Ages, the feudal system. This was feudalism. You fight for me, and I will work for you. The lord or king promised military protection for his vassal or subject. In turn, the vassal promised to fight in the lord's army and to pay certain feudal dues to him. The lord was generally himself a vassal of a greater ruler or king. The feudal system established a series of circles of authority, which began at the bottom with the serfs and moved upward through vassals, lords, kings, and emperors. Of all the Germanic kings, Charlemagne is the foremost figure in this period. He began his career as the military ruler of the Frankish kingdom in what is now modern France. He began conquering additional territories in Germany, Belgium, and Italy, thus forming a vast empire. Each newly conquered territory was subjected to his laws and the Christian religion. During a visit to Rome in 800 A.D., he was crowned as the first Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. Charlemagne's accomplishments were numerous. He was one of the few rulers of the Middle Ages who could read. He sponsored education throughout his empire. He gathered the most prominent intellectual leaders of Europe at his court. But perhaps his greatest accomplishment was to give some political order to Europe. He founded a great empire from which Germany and France eventually developed. Beginning with Charlemagne, most of Europe was ruled by one man, known as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Although the size of the Holy Roman Empire gradually decreased over the centuries, it survived as an institution until the 18th century. Another important ruler was Alfred the Great. From 871 to 901, he gave England a strong government. Before Alfred, England was made up of a number of small kingdoms, each independent of the other. Alfred, who was originally only the king of Wessex, conquered the neighboring kingdoms and united them under his rule. The dynasty established by Alfred was to last until the 11th century. The Normans conquered England in 1066. They united the country under William the Conqueror. William was the ruler of Normandy in France, just across the English Channel. He claimed, with some justification, that he had inherited England as a fief, but the English refused to swear allegiance to him. Crossing the Channel, he defeated the English at Hastings in 1066, establishing Norman rule in England. For centuries, French was the official language of the English court, but in time, the kingdoms of Normandy and England became separated once more. In this period, the Christian church became the one church of Europe. Much of the Christianization of Europe was accomplished by missionaries, such as St. Boniface, who brought Christianity to northern Germany, and St. Patrick, who preached the Christian gospel in Ireland. The church, since it was international and since Europeans believed that their salvation was dependent upon it, became the single most powerful institution during the Middle Ages. Kings ruled only limited areas. The Pope was supreme everywhere. Let us pause for a minute to see how much we remember from what we have just seen and heard. Here are 4 statements which list the contributions the Middle or Dark Ages gave to the world. One of these contributions was not made during that time. Can you tell which one was not a medieval contribution? Here are the choices. 1. Beginnings of Germany, France, and England. 2. Growth of Christianity. 3. Invention of writing. 4. Development of the feudal system. Did you notice which one of these was not a medieval contribution? Let's see if you were right. Contributions of Dark Ages. 1. Beginnings of Germany, France, and England. 2. Growth of Christianity. 3. Monasteries and early books. 4. Development of the feudal system. You see now that the third item in the first list was not a contribution of the Middle Ages. Writing was not invented during this period, but monasteries did have schools and extensive libraries where books were preserved and copied. Our world today could not have come into being had it not been for this important legacy from the Dark Ages in Europe.